Supporter cards are some of the strongest cards in the Pokemon trading card game across all formats. For the singleton format called Gym Leader Challenge, Cynthia is one of the best supporters, but like most cards, it doesn't fit into every deck. This video is a deep dive into the supporter card Cynthia for Gym Leader Challenge. Gym Leader Challenge, or GLC, is a Pokemon trading card game format with specific deck construction rules. Each deck allows no more than one copy of any card name, allows only one type of Pokemon, excludes rulebox cards like Radiant Pokemon and Pokemon EX, and excludes cards from before the Black and White era. For more on the rules of GLC, you can check out the rules page and FAQ page at gymleaderchallenge.com. That site also provides a guide of typical trainer cards. If you are just starting out or are curious about the format, I recommend taking a look. I'll give a summary of the card, compare it to similar cards, and discuss strategies that work or don't work well with Cynthia. Cynthia lets you shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. Notably, it refreshes your hand without discarding any resources and has no special requirements to be played. On the flip side, it cannot fetch any specific card, and without top deck manipulation like Primate Wisdom or Rangaroo, there's no guarantee of which 6 cards you will draw. So how strong is the supporter card Cynthia? The best way to answer this question is to compare it to similar cards. Let's start with Colress. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw a card for each benched Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent's. Each player can have up to 5 benched Pokemon, so Colress can potentially draw 10 cards. Most decks like to put several Pokemon in play, so drawing more than 6 cards happens frequently. However, that is not the case during the first couple of turns. Cynthia is better early in the game since it always draws 6 cards and fits into decks that want to play faster. In the late game, Colress is usually better. Cynthia is also similar to Tate and Liza. Choose one, shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 5 cards. Or switch your active Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon. If you choose the draw effect, this card draws one less card than Cynthia. However, Tate and Liza is more flexible because of its switch effect. Decks with Pokemon that synergize with switch cards should probably run Tate and Liza, but Cynthia works better for decks that otherwise lack draw power. The main downside of playing Cynthia is that it has no disruptive effect. There are several supporters, N, Iono, Marnie, and Judge, that reset both you and your opponent's hands. N forces each player to shuffle their hand into their deck, then draw a card for each of their remaining prize cards. Prize cards represent the progress of the game. Each time a player knocks out an opposing Pokemon, they take one of their prize cards. The game ends if either player takes all of their prize cards. If a player only has one prize remaining, N will force them to have only one card in hand. However, if N is played early, it almost always becomes the effect of Cynthia for both players and may end up helping rather than hurting your opponent. Cynthia is better early, and N is better late. Iono is similar to N and is also more disruptive in the late game. Judge and Marnie are also disruptive, but they let each player draw a set number of cards. Judge makes both players shuffle their hand into their deck and draw 4 cards. Judge is better than Cynthia for situations where your opponent has a good hand or has a large hand size, especially for decks that have more draw support or want a low hand size. That said, Cynthia will more consistently help you. Marnie makes both players shuffle their hand and place it on the bottom of their deck. You draw 5 cards, and your opponent draws 4. Since Marnie does not shuffle either player's deck, there is no chance of either player drawing into a card that was in their hand before Marnie was played unless their deck had few cards. Iono has a similar shuffle effect, and this distinction makes Iono and Marnie better than Cynthia if you need a specific card in your hand back in your deck like Rapid Strike Jumpluff. Otherwise, it depends on the game situation. If your opponent has a good hand, Marnie is better. If your opponent has a bad hand, Cynthia is better. Professor's Research lets you discard your hand to draw 7 cards. This card and Cynthia both refresh the hand, but Professor's Research synergizes more with cards that are better in the discard than in the deck, like Distortion Door Giratina. Cynthia and Professor's Research have been played together in several decks, and neither one is strictly better than the other. Lily is another comparable card to Cynthia. Draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. If it's your first turn, draw cards until you have 8 cards instead. Lily is very good on turn 1, but it doesn't work well with other supporters. Each player can only play one supporter per turn, so other supporters can clog the hand and prevent you from drawing more cards. Cynthia is generally better for this reason. It doesn't care about which other cards are in your hand because all of them will get shuffled into the deck. Cynthia directly outclasses several cards, which I'll go over briefly. Shauna and Youngster both have the same effect. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 5 cards. Both draw 1 less card than Cynthia with no additional effect. Hala. Shuffle your hand into your deck. If you have used your GX attack, draw 7 cards. If not, draw 4 cards. Most GLC decks don't have a GX attack. Even the ones that do would rather have Cynthia so that their GX attack is an option, not a necessity. Professor Birch's observation. Shuffle your hand into your deck and flip a coin. If heads, draw 7 cards. If tails, draw 4 cards. Unless you have a way to manipulate coin flips like the supporter card will, the extra draw is not worth the equal chance of drawing 2 less than Cynthia. Bruno. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 4 cards. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, draw 7 instead. This card is not bad, but Cynthia is better after turns where no knockout is taken, and so is better early in a game. Also, opposing spread decks can play around cards like Bruno by placing damage in a way that sets up multiple knockouts on a future turn. Parasol Lady. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 4 cards. If you go second and it's your first turn, draw 8 cards instead. This is good on turn 1 going second, but Cynthia's better after turn 1. Let's now go over some cards that work well with Cynthia. Like other supporters, Cynthia works well with Pokemon that can search supporter cards like Buddy Catch Gallade and Fast Call Dragonite. Tanky grass decks also tend to run Cynthia because of the lack of consistent draw power. The best grass Pokemon that draw cards are Seasonal Blessings Saucebuck and Stoked Straw Beautifly, but they are not as good or as easy to set up as draw engines in other types like Industrious Incisors Bibarel in Colorless and Abyssal Hand Octillery for Water. Cynthia makes up for the lack of draw power and makes these decks more consistent. It also works well with Voltage Beat Rillaboom to shuffle basic grass energy in hand back into the deck so they can be fetched with Rillaboom's ability. Finally, Cynthia was good in colorless Archeops decks before the ban to Pokemon Research Lab. Arcan can be fetched with Pokemon Research Lab, but only if it was in the deck. Cynthia could shuffle Arcan back into the deck to improve the chance of turn 1 Arcan. Even after the ban to Pokemon Research Lab, Cynthia could shuffle Special Energy into the deck to be fetched by Primal Turbo Archeops. Cynthia is generally flexible, but it doesn't work well in particular strategies. Item-heavy decks that revolve around cards like Bicycle and Pokestop don't work well with Cynthia. For example, some fighting decks want to have a low hand size to be able to play the supporter card Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, which requires it to be the last card in hand. Since each player can only play one supporter card per turn, having Cynthia in hand can prevent you from playing Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick. Also, Cynthia gives the player 6 random cards from the deck, making it difficult to plan for Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick on future turns. Cynthia also tends to not work well in control decks. Many GLC control strategies rely on having a large hand size and reaching a small deck size. Cynthia works against that by shuffling your hand into the deck, so unless you only had a couple of cards in hand to begin with, you aren't progressing through the deck fast enough. Overall, Cynthia is a consistent draw supporter. While it doesn't have any disruptive power, it enables setup decks and saves cards for future turns. It's no surprise that it is seen in a wide range of decks. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you want to see more deep dives of specific cards. I tried some animations for this one and video editing is difficult. Bop!